So this patch is called the Mezzanine. And it began out of a conversation that I had with Lawrence Karsten, who uploaded the freeze slicer patch a couple weeks ago that's excellent. And he was talking to me about how to create other sort of freeze effects and asked, how would you layer frozen sounds on top of one another? And I suggested that you could do that with a feedback loop set up between two alternating freezing granular modules. And so I started to explore that as just sort of a proof of concept, and I liked it, so I built a patch out of it. And so that's what the Mezzanine really is. So you have two granular modules that alternate being frozen, and then there's a feedback network that they go into of filters, because if you feed them back onto one another, the granular modules create both a lot of high and low frequencies in the feedback path. So I put in a low pass filter and a high pass filter to try to create a band pass that's the least destructive that I could come up with. And it will eliminate some of the higher frequencies and some of the lower frequencies, but I think it captures the mid-range pretty well. And then they pass out through all pass filters to try to smooth some of the edges, because granular modules, when they're frozen, can be sort of glitchy, and you'll hear that right now. I have it in, there's two modes. There's one that's entirely controlled the way you would a normal freeze pedal, where if I deactivate this, the right stomp switch chooses between these two modes. If I deactivate it, it's just, and it'll freeze. It'll freeze whenever I press this button. It will actually also do that in the other mode, which I did on purpose. So this is a mode driven by an LFO, and you can set the rate here. I'll come back to the rate in a second. Let me speed this up a little bit. But you can also foot switch through it to create some, some interesting textures. So that's something to experiment with, but also be aware of. If you're in the automatic mode, you can still advance the freeze buffer. And why don't I talk about the automatic mode now? So someone will go, well, why isn't it tap tempo? Why isn't it MIDI clock? In particular with this one, I really made a choice about whether to make it controllable by a rate or by a clock. And that's because there's a not great range. So, if we push this up to a BPM that a lot of people would use, like, 105. It doesn't have quite the same effect. And that's because there is a decay network. It's not lossless. You can't hold on to the same things forever, because each time you freeze a new layer, it adds gain to the circuit. And if you made it lossless, you'd still have the same effect of things fading away over time, because you're always introducing new gain to the circuit when you add a new frozen layer. So, the other part of that is, and I'll see if I can get it to go wild, the middle stomp switch controls whether or not the decay network is active. So it's a good thing to keep in mind if things start going haywire. It's also good because if you deactivate it, let me go back to the controlled mode. This just works like a normal freeze pedal. Sorry, I forgot to deactivate it. So if you push this too far, you end up with it trying to capture sounds that are shorter. A granular module needs a certain amount of time to capture something in its buffer. So as you keep pushing this, let me turn up the volume. There are these awful clicks. And it's just not fun. So I decided, leave it as a rate control that you can dial in. Turn back on the decay. And this controls this amount. So if you push it up really high, usually it will start to oscillate. That time it didn't, so that's nice. What happens is that some of those low and high frequencies will start to build up and it'll sound very bad. So, one is pretty good. Anything below that is generally what I stick to. So I'm going to show another aspect, which is that you can do pitch shifting. So each of the channels has its own pitch, and I really like this particular one that I've set it to, which is about somewhere between 1.5 seconds and 2 seconds of decay time, and then every other shift is stepped down by a fourth, and it creates really cool pads, I think. So but you can do other things, if you start doing, both of the freezes pitch down, you get cool things. When they start going up, things get kind of pitchy fast, in my opinion. Not my favorite sound in the world. And so you may be hearing a little bit of reverb. I passed the granular modules through a fairly light reverb light, just to, again, kind of smooth things out and make them more, even. But there's also an additional reverb circuit. You could add your own reverb. Reverb plays really nice with this. which is another reverb light, and it affects the dry signal as well. And, you know, the downside of the automated mode is that when you're pressing the stomp switch, it's very easy to capture a note after the transient. But if you capture it on the transient, the attack, you get those sounds that aren't the most awesome in the world. So that's, you know, I mean, I've grown to kind of like it in that mode, but it's really easy to avoid those if you're doing it just by the manual mode with the stomp switch. So that's the Mezzanine. I hope you enjoy it.